Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Babylon podcast. Today we're joined by Twitter superstar Christoph. Christoph is a good friend of ours. We've been in contact for quite some time now, and it's always a pleasure to speak with him and catch up. In this episode, we go over his journey through Twitter and discuss topics such as deplatforming, the effect that Twitter has had on public discourse, the public square versus private platform debates, and much more. You can follow him on Twitter, the link to which is going to be in the description of the video below. Anyways, without further ado, let's get on with the video. All right, everyone, thank you so much once more for joining us here on this Babylon podcast. It's been a while since we've done one of these things, but what better way to return to the podcasting format without the one and only Christoph. Christoph, how are you doing?
Hey, good, thanks, man.
Mm-hmm.
Recovering from a bit of illness, but apart from that, I'm all right.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad to hear that. I very rudely ignored Bruce. I'm so sorry. Bruce, of course, is here, my longtime co-host and great friend. Bruce, how are you doing?
I am better knowing that I have not been forgotten. And like we have today, we have one of our favorite people on the podcast. He's been a guest several times in a row now and has some of the snarkiest, funniest, and some of the best all-around Twitter takes I've ever that I enjoy hearing. So, Christoph, man, it's always good to have you on.
Thanks, man. You know, it's funny, like when you're getting described as snarky, because in real life, I'm not really like that at all. But there's just something about Twitter that brings it out, and I guess Twitter is well known for bringing out the worst sides of everybody. So maybe that's my bad side coming out, because my real life personality, it's not. I do like dark jokes and that sort of stuff, but I'm not necessarily the snarkiest person. So.
Well, the thing is, it's like people will talk about sometimes how mockery is necessary when we're talking about ideas. And one of the things I've always appreciated about the way you did things. I mean, there's definitely a snarky side to it, but you've never gone into like full on abuse or anything like that. It's just enough to get the point across, and people can look at it and like just smile or laugh, and they get the point. But it's not like. It's not dehumanizing or anything like that. That's what I think a lot of people, including myself, appreciate about your takes and just the way you do it. There's a certain art to it.
That's good to hear. Like, I mean, maybe it sounds weird saying there's a particular ethical philosophy behind my, dumbass shit posts, but I do prefer to focus on making fun of the idea, not necessarily the person. Like, and obviously there are some people that sometimes I can't help myself, and I have to kind of go, at them as a person, maybe. But I think as a general rule, it's better that we just make fun of people's ideas, and point out how stupid the ideas are. Whereas, like, when we get into just attacking a person, like you see this kind of stuff all the time online of a particular person gets attacked as and the tweets just become about them as a person, and this person is bad in some way, and yeah, some people are bad, but for the most part, some people are just misguided. Some people are actually they're probably quite nice people if you know them, but some of their takes on things are stupid, and you can say that's a stupid take without trying to say this person is evil or this person is a moron or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's become a common trope in these conversations for the past 10 years, where it becomes misconstrued whether or not someone is attacking an idea or whether or not someone is attacking an individual. We saw this happening with Sam Harris back at the beginning of the early 2010s, when he started going after religion, and in particular going after Islam, and he was accused of being Islamophobic, or particularly actually being bigoted against Muslims, and he had to constantly reiterate that he was just criticizing Islam as a particular set of ideas and the effects that it has on the human psyche. This has been happening over and over and over again. But I'm really glad that you mentioned, and how you brought up, this is something that I did want to talk about later on in the podcast, about how Twitter really seems to bring about a new person out of us, where people's version of themselves on Twitter is completely different than their versions of themselves online. And I definitely do want to talk about that, so we'll put a pin in there. But I'm also really interested because I have a horrible memory, and I've already forgotten if you've told us this before. But at the very least, I can say that it would be for the sake of the audience to get myself out of that one. Sort of your introduction into Twitter and how you began there, why you decided to ruin your life by becoming a popular figure on Twitter in some sense. So, what's your story there behind why you decided to get on Twitter and sort of as time progressed, how you became the person that you are on Twitter?
Well, I used to blog, and that sort of ran its course. The the person the person I was when I started the blog probably was not the person that I was by the time I decided to wrap it up. You know, like I was probably, I wouldn't say I was woke. I mean, woke wasn't even a term then, but um,
Mm,
you know, I was probably a bit more social justice-y at the start compared to after a while. I got very disillusioned with that whole thing, and the tone changed. And after a while, I just maybe I'm just not feeling this anymore. And also, and part of that is the sort of more long form ideas that you have to put out there when it comes to blogging. So I shut that down, and for a little while I was venting shit on Facebook, and then I realized half the people that follow me on Facebook don't want to hear the stupid things I have to say. You know, they're just um, you know, some random person I met, a friend of a friend, and added them on Facebook 3 years ago. They don't want to know what I think about X. Um, and then, and a lot of the people, I mean, I heard I read a thing once saying that like Twitter is for creating an audience of people to hear your views, whereas Facebook is to piss off the people who already know you and don't want to hear what you have to say, something like that. And so I thought I need to stop poisoning uh, the audience I have on Facebook who just want to see photos of my family or whatever it is, with my latest contrarian take. So I stopped using Facebook for almost everything and started Twitter. And yeah, I was probably quite lucky to have come into contact with a few people who boosted me a bit, and just at some point I just kind of started to gain a lot of followers, and I've sort of stagnated now. I hit 30 about 2 years ago, and I've been stuck there. So I think I've
mm.
maybe hit my natural limits, perhaps. But who knows? That's
I'm
fine.
very curious. I didn't know that you started off being much further to the woke side of things. And for the sake of clarification, because that word can mean so many different things to so many different people, what do you mean by you were woke at that time, or at least, somewhat woke?
Uh, oh, look, I've always been, I guess, left wing inclined in my way of looking at things, and from from when I first started thinking about social issues, when I was about 17, 18. I guess I was influenced by listening to a lot of Bob Marley and hip hop and all this sort of thing. And I guess standard kind of progressive views in a lot of ways. Probably not in an obnoxious way as some people are, but I was also I was very interested in racial politics and ethnicity and that sort of stuff. And I used to follow a lot of the different blogs and discourse on discussing things like that. Um, and I guess it was the more you start to be exposed to those kind of views, you may just get further and further into it and buy into all that stuff. But at a certain point, I hit a kind of wall, and I just thought some of this stuff is not really, it doesn't stack up. It doesn't hold up to scrutiny intellectually.
Mhm.
And I started to just get annoyed by by the interactions I was having with different people, and by the things I found I was expected to believe. So because ultimately, as much as I find ethnicity and race and culture interesting topics to discuss and think about, um, I also want to think less about race. If you don't understand what I'm saying, like I don't want to have racial politics entering into everyday, how I have to think about things every day.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by, if I talk to someone and they're from this particular country, yeah, hey, tell me all about your culture and your country. That's great. Or I like human genetics and understanding where we all come from, but I don't like this idea that just because I am of X background, then you have to listen to me, and I must be absolutely correct, and you can't correct me because I have this background, or I'm I deserve special privileges because I have particular racial background, that kind of stuff, which is where I saw things moving. And I guess, a lot of people who are a bit anti woke, as I guess you might say I am, they do come out of that progressive space. And like, I'm a bit older than you guys. I think I'm old enough to know a politics that preceded the social media era. Like I guess my understanding of what progressive politics is preceded, um, Tumblr and Twitter and the blogosphere and all that sort of stuff. And for me, that's the social media has created these bubbles of ideology that have made people a bit crazier.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I've got something, a politics that's a bit stuck in the past in a way, just because the way things have changed in some ways over the last couple of decades of social media have gone a bit loony, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's weird seeing, in particular, how Twitter has affected the public discourse in a way that makes it seem like I can't imagine anything productive coming from Twitter if two people are debating each other and they're on completely different sides of the political aisle. And I was thinking about this recently, how about our personality, this goes back to what you were saying about personalities, our personalities on Twitter and our personalities on the internet in general, they seem to be like completely different from our personalities in real life, so much so to the point where it really comes across, Twitter comes across almost as like a like a second reality, like almost like a meta reality in some sense, where in real life, right, no one would expect for an entire public apology in front of the classroom if they made some weird transgression between them and another individual, whereas there's an expectation for a public apology if someone tweeted something offensive back in 2016. And almost everyone, almost like I would expect that almost everyone knows that that apology probably isn't sincere, but it's what you have to do in order to come back into the limelight. It seems like something that most people know, or at the very least, enough people know to the point where you'd expect people to start saying something, but they just keep doing it, right? There's an apology expected, and they do it. So it seems like there's like this second level of social interaction that we've created, that we've invented for the sake of social media. And I remember someone making the argument that it might have been Sam Harris, or I might have been Brett Weinstein, who knows, but we didn't evolve to be able to deal with social media. And not only did we not evolve to deal with social media, we didn't develop the mental faculties to be able to deal with it. So I often wonder, going back to the question that I want to ask you is, I know it's been said jokingly that we'd be better off without Twitter. We'd be better off without these platforms in which we can amplify our opinion in a very counterproductive way. I wonder if that actually might genuinely be true. And this is not me advocating that we should take down Twitter, but does make me wonder, would we genuinely be better off without Twitter? Or do the positive effects from a platform like that, whether it means amplifying positive voices or whether that means spreading the diversity of ideas to whatever extent it's actually effective, do the positive effects of Twitter outweigh the negative ones? I don't know the answer to that. I genuinely don't, but I'd be happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know either. And Twitter is a forum that contains all kinds of spheres, and there's people who use Twitter and just focus on sport or gardening or knitting or whatever it is, and I'm sure that those spaces have some toxicity in them as well. But I guess it's where we focus on politics and social issues and that sort of stuff where things seem to get really ugly. But even then, there's people who log on and engage in those topics in different ways and don't get into the real awful stuff. I guess one way I think about Twitter and how like what it's like, you mentioned to have an argument or have a debate on an issue on Twitter, and one way it's different to just you and I debating an issue in this format is it's so public. So let's just say you and I are having a discussion about something we disagree with, and every time you say something, you've got 100 or 1,000 people watching in, and someone go, "Yeah, that good point. Fuck him up, Vince." Like. And then I make my point, and other people go, "Oh yeah, Chris, you got him, yeah, tell that piece of shit what's up," that kind of thing. And once I've got that kind of my posse behind me who are encouraging me and telling me that you suck, this guy you're talking to, his shit, you should tell him what's what. It's hard for me to back down. It's harder to see your side of the point. And then another similar thing to how that functions, right? Particularly for people who get to the like a really big profile. We've talked a little bit before about some people kind of go a bit crazy after being a while on Twitter. Let's take, say, Jordan Peterson, for example. He's kind of had a bit of a weird meltdown-y behavior recently. But also, I have some sympathy for him because let's say, every time you put one of your thoughts out there's thousands of people just going, "Oh, you fucking suck. You're a piece of shit," and this is not me saying I like Peterson or whatever, but it's almost like, how people who have schizophrenia or whatever, and they're just walking along doing their day-to-day life, and there are voices in their head just going, "Oh, you're shit. You suck. You can't do anything right." And in some ways, I feel like Twitter is like that because you log on and you think about J.K. Rowling or Jordan Peterson or any politician, Ilhan Omar. Like Ilhan Omar, if she logs on and reads her comments, it's people telling her, you're a terrorist, you hate America. Imagine having a day-to-day life where thousands of people are abusing you or telling you you're worthless all the time. It's not healthy for your brain, and some people, understandably, go a bit mad. So definitely we are not really evolved to deal with that kind of thing. Like, you've got to have a really thick skin or really good coping mechanisms to drown it out. Or you're gonna sort of get a maybe a warped kind of perspective on what's actually going on, because what you see of the people you disagree with sometimes the most ugly, hateful mob of people.
It's always that's always really interesting to explore, because social media, as we know, it really affects the mental health of people. But it never truly occurred to me, like, if someone used it for a long extended period of time to just get heaps of abuse landed on them, that they would just break somewhere later on. I mean, like, just about every single one of our public intellectuals has disappointed me to some degree, but that's natural. They're human. Some are worse than others, but like, being human, being subject to the human condition, we're all subject to it. Some of the views they espouse on Twitter can get them kicked off. But one of the things I'm a little concerned about is, okay, so Twitter is one thing. So Twitter deplatforming, especially, is just one platform you can get kicked off of. But like, what I'm really concerned about now is, like, you have Colin Wright speaking out assiduously against a gender ideology, and he's doing like a lot of great work there. But like he posted on Twitter saying that PayPal has kicked him off. And as far as we know, we know that companies like PayPal can just kick someone off their platforms completely arbitrarily, and people now you're not just depriving someone of a certain social media platform, you're directly cutting off someone's finances, and that to me sounds like we've crossed the dangerous Rubicon, because most everything we use today is all digital, essential services, etc. Services essential to life. I mean, it's really disingenuous to say that we can take our business elsewhere. You just can't do that now. So, have we crossed the line in regards to social media with now we're going into utilities where utilities can now drop you? Like, do you see that happening?
Yeah, I agree with you. That is dangerous, and in maybe some extreme cases, I might not have a problem with it. I mean, if that happens to Alex Jones or Andrew Tate, I can't say I'm really going to shed a tear. But again, like, where do you stop? And my my idea of who is a dangerous extremist, that might not be the same as the next person. And right. So for other people, they might say Colin Wright is a dangerous ideologue who's spreading hate, and therefore he needs to have this happen to him. I personally, I'm not only so familiar with Colin. I agree with some of his stuff, and I disagree with some others. But yeah, that seems excessive to me. For whatever disagreements one might have with him, I certainly don't think he fits that bill as someone who is so threatening or dangerous that kind of extreme measures should happen to him. Because we are we do exist on these platforms and use them as means of communicating with others and earning livelihoods and that sort of stuff, and so it's quite extreme. I guess my broad philosophy is I'm for more speech and more freedom in this aspect, but then there's clearly some people I think maybe it's not a bad thing, for them to have that happen to them. But I guess how do you define who is deserving of that kind of thing? Because I can certainly give other people who have received those kinds of punishments, and you think, that seems really excessive.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that leads into the whole conundrum of whether or not Twitter is a private company and should, or they are, but whether or not Twitter should have the power to deplatform whomever they would like, because they are a private company. And this was the issue that Sam Harris raised. Sam Harris, philosopher and neuroscientist. I'm sure most people, if not all people watching, already know who he is, but he got into some hot water recently after he went on the Trigonometry podcast. Now, Sam Harris was probably the only person in the IDW that went so hardcore against Donald Trump as he did. Everyone else either said that he was ultimately a net positive for society, or that he wasn't as bad as someone like Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden was. Harris seemed to be the only one who was pretty much staunchly against the idea of Donald Trump, and so he wanted to put an podcast, an anti-Trump podcast, and they were going back and forth about Donald Trump. And then Sam Harris basically made the argument that it was justifiable for Twitter to deplatform someone like Donald Trump, because he viewed Donald Trump in the same way that he viewed Alex Jones. And the argument that he made against the obvious accusation that was against free speech, Sam Harris has always been pro free speech and against the platforming.
Vern, you got to fix your audio, dude. It's like the.
Oh, 1 second.
Yeah, you sound good now.
Oh,
yeah.
Am I good now?
Yeah.
You might have to repeat all that.
Oh shoot. Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty muffled.
Okay, it's good now though.
It's good now.
Yeah.
Okay, let me know if it goes bad. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Christoph, because this leads into the whole debate about whether or not social media platforms like Twitter or Facebook or whichever social media site it may be should be viewed in the sense of a private company being able to deplatform whomever they would like, or more of a public square. Sam Harris, the philosopher and neuroscientist that I'm sure most people, if not all people listening, already know of, got in some hot water recently after making the argument that Twitter should be viewed as a private company and they should be able to deplatform whomever they would like, curate content on there as they would like, in the same way that Wikipedia curates their content. Wikipedia doesn't let just anybody um, post whatever they want on Wikipedia without some level of fact checking. So there's always going to be some things on Wikipedia that say citation needed if a claim is made spuriously. And this leads into the whole debate about to what extent a company, a platform that is as huge as Twitter, to the point where it's effectively created a monopoly. Gab can make their own platform, so can Truth Social. Doesn't matter. They're not going to get as big as Twitter. Twitter just really monopolized that specific area within the public discourse. And so they so that raises ethical concerns about whether or not, because it is so big, should it be viewed as a public square and not be treated as a private company. So Sam Harris makes the argument that no, it should still be a private company, or be viewed in that sense, when it comes to what power they should have, because everything should be curated to some extent, no matter what. Wikipedia curates their stuff, so you can't just go on Wikipedia and make a bogus claim. If you do, you'll either have that little citation needed little thing right next to your claim or whatever it may be. If you if you have a website, a platform like that is left unchecked, that has no content moderation whatsoever, you're going to get something like 4chan, which is just a complete cesspool, and whatever idea of free speech you know utopia was thought up in the heads of the people who made 4chan, that there'd be people conversing different ideas and new ideas would come up. Whatever idea that you thought was going to come out of having free speech left unchecked, or I shouldn't say free speech, but speech left unchecked, it's it's going to go to shit, just like 4chan did. And that's what Twitter will ultimately become if we let people like Alex Jones on, or Andrew Tate, or Donald Trump. Yeah, so this was his argument against Donald Trump. So what are your thoughts on the debate between Twitter, being as big as it is, being viewed as a private platform, and they should be allowed to take down whomever they would like? It doesn't matter. They don't even need a reason. Or whether or not it's big enough to the point where it should be viewed as the public square.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? I mean, we like to talk about the marketplace of ideas, but maybe that's what 4chan is. You know, I mean, maybe this idea we have of all these free exchange of ideas, maybe that looks like something like 4chan. Maybe it's chaos. So it's hard to know where to stand on that. Like, I think if you're saying that a private company can't regulate what happens on its platform, that I don't know if that is feasible. You know, like, I think, because if Twitter can't have its own policies about what it moderates, or who it allows in, then who does? You know, like, is it just that we make a rule that there's no moderation? I mean, I don't know. In a way, like, Twitter's enforcement is like real life law enforcement, in that some people seem to get away with all kinds of things. Some people get punished really heavily for not much at all. And so it's really imperfect in that sense. There's some ways it's really excessive, and some ways not enough. Like, I have a guy recently who just is probably on his 4th, 5th, 6th account, and every time he gets a new account, he reappears in my mentions and calls me a pedophile and say, oh, you know, your time is coming. He's, you know, says racist shit as well. The last thing I remember him saying is referring to me as mystery meat because I'm mixed race. And I've you know, I can tolerate a certain amount of this stuff, but some of it is kind of over the top and, you know, threatening behavior. And so I report it and whatever. And I'm sure he's getting reported by other people because he has this behavior towards other people as well. But, you know, he gets gets banned, and then he reappears a week later and does the same shit. And there's lots of accounts like that, and so there's some people who manage to circumvent whatever moderation rules there are, and still just be happily very abusive to people, and um, it goes on. Whereas some people, some people I've known have fallen afoul of particular groups of people. It could be like Nazis. I know a guy who pissed off some Nazis on Twitter, and then they mass flagged him and got his account banned. And he after maybe making 2 accounts to come back, he eventually just gave up because it was just decided it wasn't worth the hassle. And I imagine he's free now and doing much nicer things in his life. But yeah, so you can see that those rules can easily be co-opted by people with scores to settle, who want to get people taken down. It's really very hard to say, because you don't want to, as you said, you can't have a society with no rules, and Twitter is a society in a way, so you have to have some rules. But then you can debate and argue about, are those rules excessive or not harsh enough in some ways. I always try and come down on more speech is better than less, but I don't like to have random people abusing me either. So how do you find that balance?
Yeah, you brought up a good point about how if it were to be the case that that there should be some level of regulation in the sense of making sure that companies like Twitter or whatever it may be don't just kick off people whomever they want, that we should view these platforms as public space. Um, who exactly is going to be in charge of that? And in the sense of making sure that we kick off people who are viewed as extreme or who are viewed as uh, people who have dangerous ideas, again, how do we define that? And just the variety of opinion on what constitutes dangerous ideas and genuinely potentially violent ideas. It's just so all over the place. There seems to be no solution whether or not we decide to view Twitter as a private company who should be able to deplatform whomever they would like, or there should be regulation on Twitter to make sure that they don't kick off people for saying seemingly innocent things like that one lady who got kicked off Twitter for saying that verbatim, she said women can't be men or men can't be women or one of those things, right?
Yeah.
So she
Megan Murphy, I think her name was.
Oh, was it that? Yeah. Was it something like that?
I think that's her. I'm not that familiar with her, but I've heard that before. I believe that's her name.
And stuff like that, it's pretty crazy, but it's difficult to come up with a foolproof solution, a solution in which we don't have to worry about someone defining things like hate speech or violent behavior in a way that we would heavily disagree with, but also on the other end where there are genuine threats being made, and someone could interpret that threat as being, well, that's just online trash talk, versus that's a genuine threat. It's just, no matter what, different interpretations are going to cause this to be so messy. And so for me, it seems like the only solution, or the only potential solution, would be to recognize that Twitter kind of has to be viewed as a private platform and they should be able to do whatever they want. But we should also try to make sure that, one, we try our best to defend the culture that we want to make, a culture that values free speech, a culture that values differing opinions, and really views this nasty behavior that has culminated on Twitter in a very, very negative light, while simultaneously also making sure that Twitter, and this goes into a much more political realm, Twitter doesn't maintain the monopoly that it has. I mean, that's more of a populist argument, but that really seems to be the only way out of this really hard conundrum that we have. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts on that, on Christoph or Bruce, but that seems to be the only thing that I can think of that makes some sense to me. But no matter what, even that thing that I presented, I'm sure there's a lot of holes in it too.
I mean, I think this is a difficult scenario to talk about because, this happened years ago. I have a comment about Joe Rogan here, but like one person did come to mind, Jordan Peterson. There was a what's that guy's name? Richard Spencer, the
Yeah.
the alt right guy who made a comment saying once that he agreed with Jordan Peterson. I think there was several years ago. He made an obscure post on Twitter saying he wanted to have a conversation with him. And all of us, like, you know, I'm not I don't agree with everything Jordan says, but though in general I like him. You know, like this views on religion, I think are very questionable. But you know, as a clinical psychologist, I think he's excellent. But anyway, Jordan was getting all this flack about being an alt right, which anyone who is very familiar with his work can clearly see that he's not. But all of us who were fans of his, or at least liked him, were wondering what he should do, what to do with Richard Spencer. Um, and a friend of mine who I occasionally talk to about this stuff said, like, you know what I think Jordan should do? She should put out a post out there and say, like, the views of Richard Spencer are very, very well known to the community, and I will not be having a conversation with him because this guy had already made his intentions clear. And you know, I'm a firm believer in the marketplace of ideas, you say, Christoph. But you know, when someone has made their stance abundantly clear in the past, and they're stating that, you know, this conversation he wants to have with Peterson can only lead down, can presumably lead down that route, then you know Peterson is in no way obligated to have a conversation with this guy. But on the you know, going back to Rogan, you know, I'm a fan of Rogan. I'm a huge proponent of the idea that he's held the political center together the last couple of years. I'm very, very thankful for his podcast. Listen to people from left and right and people from all over. But like, I had trouble with some of the people he's chosen to have on. We mentioned Alex Jones earlier. Jones has spewed out a lot of nonsense that has made a lot of people suffer. So, you know, Jones is responsible for a lot of great harm, but and you know, and Joe Rogan has had him on a show to talk, you know, and you know, as a fan of Rogan and as a fan of listening to debate, like I have trouble with that. There's this huge gray area here in which we want to enable speech, but we get in some really, really nebulous realms here, because I agree certain ideas are harmful and they should they should be exposed. But like, you know, you're also by extension kind of sort of giving someone a platform to speak on. And how do you draw the line between someone who says, like, we know they're genuinely bad, we can convincingly say, like, we already know everything we need to know about you, so fuck off, and you're definitely a racist, definitely a Nazi. We know that for certain, given the views you've espoused, and in the stance, there's enough information out there to not justify someone giving someone a platform, given their history, given their approach to a certain viewpoint at the moment. But again, we resort back to giving the individual who has a platform a personal choice there, and that's not always easy to see.
Yeah, I think whoever is controlling power in terms of the cultural ideas of the day is going to have their own take on who is beyond the pale, in a way that maybe Richard Spencer is. If you know, I guess today, you know, culture is largely controlled by a sort of slightly left of center group of people, you know, and so there's ideas that are considered beyond the pale by them, which are probably quite normal for the average person. So, like, if you ask the average person their idea on, you know, what we call gender ideology, you know, like, how many genders are there? You know, the average person in the street is going to say, oh, 2. That for, you know, a lot of people, including those who might moderate Twitter, that might be considered an extreme viewpoint, even though it's what the majority of people probably think.
Yeah.
And so what gets framed as extreme really depends on who is controlling the cultural power at the time. You know, likewise, if if today's American conservatives kind of grab the reins of cultural power, what they consider to be an extreme point of view might be other progressive views that are considered relatively normal. Like you can imagine a world where someone saying, it's okay to transition to, if you're born a female and you want to transition to be a man, that's okay. You can imagine a world where that is considered an extreme point of view if, the MAGA movement kind of gains power, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, I agree. Someone like Alex Jones or Richard Spencer, those are right out in the periphery, and they should stay there. And I certainly don't mind if people want to keep them off platforms and that sort of stuff. But then, where's the line? Someone like Colin Wright, as you mentioned before, or JC Single, or Sam Harris. There are a lot of people who express views that are, somewhat contrarian, but often in line with what maybe 60-70% of the population would believe. And to the people who are really in the kind of ideological bubble, those views are seen as extreme and might be kept out of there.
Is there any responsible way of platforming these sorts of people? Let's say Richard Spencer, if it had to be done, right? Because I feel, and people have made this argument before, that the problem with platforming someone like Richard Spencer or Alex Jones or Andrew Tate is that you normalize their views more, and a lot of people end up joining their ranks. So even though you platform them in hopes of whatever it may be, defeating them in a debate, a lot of times they actually just end up getting sympathy. So you shouldn't even platform them in the first place. And I was thinking about how, one, that says something very scary about our society if it is the case. But two, I think part of the reason why platforming very controversial speakers often makes them more popular, not less, it doesn't come across as if they're being dunked on and completely obliterated in a debate in the marketplace of ideas, as Dave Rubin so ardently believes. The reason it doesn't come across that way, I think, is because what tends to happen is they become humanized almost to the point where they can be viewed as the sympathetic main protagonist in a movie. So instead of having someone on that is very controversial and really challenging them on their views and expressing your disgust, let's say you have someone who's in the alt-right, someone who's a genuine Nazi, you have them on your podcast, and instead of expressing very explicitly that you find their views abhorrent and you explain why and you say that you disagree with them heavily, and again, you can do this without coming across as they're only on there for you to berate them. You can do that, but people try to instead be very polite with them and say things. Almost every single podcast that I've seen with someone controversial, they say, oh, I'm really sorry with how you've been treated. You should be able to air out your views. Yeah, sure, whatever. But by humanizing so much so to the point where it's almost kind of impossible to determine whether or not you actually agree with them, the person interviewing them, people sort of become sympathetic to them, and they lose. It becomes normalized. They become numb to the idea that this person should be viewed as their views should be viewed as sort of social outcast views. So I think a good way to do it, I think Christopher Hitchens had on a KKK member, way back when he had them on this little show that he had. I forget what the show was, but you can look it up if you just type in Christopher Hitchens KKK interview or something. But he was sort of making snide remarks about them, and he was sort of joking in a sense, and it was crystal clear what Hitchens viewed of them. And so the entire comment section, last time I checked, was recognizing basically that Christopher Hitchens had the leg up there. And I often wonder if that's the best way, if we had to platform someone like that, rather than just just barfing out slogans about free speech and stuff like that. Yeah, sure, but also make it abundantly clear that you disagree with them and that you find their views disgusting. And again, you can do this without making it seem like you're that Kathy Newman interview with Jordan Peterson. You can do this. It's very possible. But I don't know what your thoughts are on in general in platforming controversial figures.
Yeah, it's tricky because an interview that will be received by one section of the audience as exposing of someone's hypocrisy or whatever, a different audience might view it in a very different way. So let's just say someone interviews Richard Spencer or whatever, and they get him to say, "Oh, yeah, well, I believe that black people are inferior," or whatever it is. And for us, a lot of people seeing that, they might get repulsed and think, "Gee, wow, this guy really is awful." But then, people who are kind of inclined to agree with Spencer on some stuff, like, "Oh, wow, he's speaking the truth. What a genius." Um, so even something that would generally be seen as exposing and trashing someone could be seen by that person's potential audience as just it's a really good example of sharing his brilliant views. I listened to Glenn Lowry interviewing Amy Wax, who's I think she's a law professor who's had some controversial statements about the racial makeup of her classes, and um, she strikes me as pretty reactionary. And like, she says stuff like, "There's too many Indian, Asian American, Indian American uh, immigrants coming from those countries, I should say." And one of the reasons is because when they get here, they start to espouse woke views, which is, pretty weird thing to say. But also, so Glenn Lowry, I mean, I would say she's kind of extremely right wing. Glenn Lowry is kind of in the center to center right kind of spectrum, and I think he's quite friendly with her. And that interview that he did with her was friendly enough that she actually seemed to be comfortable to put all these views out there, which I was listening and I was thinking, this woman's nuts, and she's she's got this been given a platform to show just how ridiculous some of her views are. And I think the beauty of someone just gently pushing back, as Glenn was, but in a somewhat friendly way. That's how I was sort of on the fence about Amy Wax before. I'd heard some of her stuff, and sometimes she seemed smart, sometimes not. But I was exposed to her being allowed to just say all these things that she believes, and I came away thinking, "Oh my God, what the hell?" Um, and so sometimes that somewhat neutral way of interviewing someone really exposes them for what they are. But at the same time, I could imagine someone listening to that and going, "Wow, yeah, she's so right. These immigrant Indians, they are really woke. That's why we should have less Indians coming into the country." So it's like I don't like people saying you shouldn't platform people, as a general rule. Like, it's one of those things that gets used as a weapon, like, "Oh, this person is bad because they platformed this person." But it's the context of that platform which matters. Were they interviewing someone to praise their bad ideas, or was it a way of interrogating those ideas and maybe arguing back, that kind of thing? Some people just have this idea that, no, you should never platform a problematic individual, but I can't agree with that at all. I guess it's all about the context.
I think like one of the things I have to add there is that recall several years ago, like I don't watch Dave Rubin's show anymore, but I think like there were a couple of articles written by some people about people that were criticizing how Dave Rubin did things, and they noticed that Dave would almost never push back or not push back substantially on his guests. left wing or right wing. Fast forward several years into the future, and you have what Vern was talking about, like, you're well, okay, not in the future, but whatever. When you're interviewing a guest, like, how much pressure are you giving them? Are you asking hard questions? Are you making efforts to try to like to get them to dig to see if they can justify their views in any kind of ethical fashion? I mean, like, I'm not a fan of Charlie Kirk's, but several years, I think there's a YouTube clip of him speaking out there on in some kind of conference, and like he had some ultra conservatives approach him, asking how could he support homosexuals? Are you not a Christian, etc. And Charlie Kirk, to his credit at the time, pushed back on these guys, saying like the United States is not a theocracy. We live in a democracy. We don't live we live in a nation with a separation between church and state. I mean, he mentioned ideas according to the words I just said, and he actually took people with these views, including some homophobes, and took them to task. That's what it is to challenge someone to allow, he would allow people to speak, but he was ready to come back. I mean, I guess you could say for better or worse, he was qualified to have those conversations with people, in that he could provide a challenge, and there was a real battle of ideas. But when you compare him with someone like Dave Rubin, Dave is not. I think that's way out of his league. He doesn't provide any kind of intellectually sophisticated pushback to anyone's views, I think, like, I don't think this will be regulated, but the qualities of the ideas that you explore in an interview is ultimately up to the people who are speaking. And if I want to compare, like, say Dave Rubin doing that interview to someone far more intelligent, I'll take the person who's had a track record of demonstrating a high IQ and good conversational skills at the same time, because that's where the battle of ideas take place. Not with a someone who's just saying, I'm just gonna let you come up here and talk, and you're gonna expose your ideas. They don't do that. Like, ideas aren't always exposed when someone's talking, but they're revealed when someone's interrogating you.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I'll just add the extra wrinkle that if we talk about the marketplace of ideas, maybe Dave Rubin is winning because he's flourishing in the marketplace of ideas because he's become extremely popular, even though what he's doing is somewhat intellectually bankrupt, and he's basically having people on just to reaffirm his views, and he'll ask them just a question which the answer is often like yes or no, and the answer will usually be agreeing with whatever Dave's view is. But maybe this is what people want, unfortunately. Like, I agree, I take someone 10 times out of 10 who's more intelligent than Dave to interview somebody, but what Dave's doing is a successful business model because people want to have their views affirmed, and this same thing happens on the left or whatever. People don't want to hear a serious interrogation of an idea. They want to take the thing that they already believe and have someone affirm it by saying it in a way that sounds persuasive.
Well, fellas, we're coming up on the hour now, and it's a shame that we have to end it here, but this was going to have to be a short one. But as always, Christoph, it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you and see your face and have that level of intimacy in which me and Bruce know what you look like and no one else does. I'm really glad that we have that privilege. But thanks so much again for coming on. It was a pleasure. And where is this very amazing, famous Twitter handle that people can search up and find you on Twitter?
You can find me at Halalcoholism. So it's basically alcoholism with HAL at the front. Look for me there. And
I have to throw this out there, and like definitely follow him for some intelligent takes and for some of the best shit posts you'll see anywhere on Twitter. I mean that in a good way.
Feel free to follow me or block me as you see fit.
I'll report him.
No, don't do that.
But Thank you once more. Thanks, Bruce. Thank you, Christoph. Been an absolute pleasure. And again, as always, we hope to see you in the future. And I hope everyone has a very blessed day.